it's kind of an awe-inspiring thing to have to choose films when the only criteria is adaptation, because there are obviously hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of great film adaptations. So the criteria I ended up with a couple of mildly quirky exceptions, was films that on one level or other had influenced me, my life, my work, because I could think of no other kind of mnemonic to use to sort of sift through the seemingly endless list of possibilities that there were for films based on adaptations. We're here watching The Sporting Life because when I was 16, almost exactly 50 years ago, I was stood in a queue trying to make a phone call home from my boarding school. Making a phone call from boarding school is a bit like making a phone call from prison. It has to be negotiated. There's usually 3 people in front of you trying to get more money off somebody else. And it's a very odd process. The telephone then was a much more fixed instrument than the mobile of today. And the reason I was in the queue was because I'd been told to ring home urgently, which was always kind of a rather worrying thing. I was at school in Lancashire and my parents were in London. And it was because I was being asked to audition for a film. I was passionate about acting more than films at the time, and the film at the time of this conversation was called The Crusaders, and the people who were talking to me didn't know whether it was a documentary or a drama. Anyway, to cut a rambling story short, it turned out to be a film called If, which was directed by Lindsay Anderson, and the reason I was being called, normally for auditions, you like call them rather than they call you, was because I was in an organisation called the National Youth Theatre, and I think what they'd done was effectively try and trace all the National Youth Theatre people who were at boarding school to be boarding school pupils. So meeting Lindsay Anderson and getting what was literally the most extraordinary romantic summer, it was the summer of '68, I was 17 years old, watching a film crew work for the first time was kind of one of the 2 or 3 moments in my young life when I suddenly got a sense of the potency and the possibilities of a film crew. If was directed by Lindsay, but shot by Miroslav Ondřesek, who was Milos Forman's Czech cameraman who never made a film in English. And for some reason that made the director-cameraman relationship more palpable because they had to pantomime it. And it's often quite impenetrable from the outside to see how that relationship worked. And Lindsay was a genuinely extraordinary man, part of the free cinema movement in the UK, along with Tony Richardson. He was a founder director of the Royal Court. His relationship with David Storey, the writer of The Sporting Life, was very intimate and based essentially in the theatre, and they collaborated on 8 or 9, I think, Royal Court productions, The Contractor. I can't remember all of them right now, but so here you have a very, very particular intimate relationship between director and writer, and never more clearly demonstrated in this genuinely extraordinary British film, The Sporting Life. We're not showing If because it's not an adaptation, but I think this is one of the great, not lost exactly, but a film that sort of has kind of sort of sunk slightly in people's landscape since it was made. But I think, you know, those of you who haven't seen it recently will see what an unbelievably powerful film it is. Extraordinary performance by Richard Harris. Nominated, I'm pretty certain, for an Oscar. Won the Best Actor at Cannes. Remember, this is a first-time director, effectively, although he wasn't exactly a child at the time. I mean, he must have been in his 40s, I suppose. And it is often just labelled as sort of part of the English, the kitchen sink sort of English film, not movement, but kind of era, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and so on. But actually, it's very personal. Story was a rugby player, knew this world very intimately. It's very unlikely in its narrative structure, and has thrillingly potent acting. I mean, Richard Harris never better, I don't think. So I think it's a great film to start with. Lindsay was a very important person to me, and I think this is a great British classic, and I hope you enjoy it. And I hope you enjoy the other films.